The National Bureau of Statistics last week published the Nigerian Living Standards Survey. This survey, conducted in conjunction with the World Bank, is the first large-scale household survey in a decade, focusing on measuring living standards of the population. Coincidentally, this survey comes as the world marked the World Population Day on Saturday, July 11. Well, joining me now to tell us more about this survey is the Director, Real Sector and Household Statistics Department of the Nigeria National Bureau of Statistics, Mr. Yemi Adeniran, and a senior economist at World Bank, Mr. Abul Azad. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us on the program. Well, Mr. Adeniran, I start with you, Mr. Adeniran. What are the key objectives of this survey and the findings?
Thank you. The Nigerian Living Standards Survey is a household-based survey that collects a wide range of socioeconomic and demographic indicators from individuals and households in Nigeria. We collected data from over 22,000 households over a period of 12 months to get these indicators. The report is out, and some of the findings are in the report as released. Some key objectives of the Nigerian Living Standards Survey is to get wide range of socioeconomic indicators such as education, level of education literacy rate, health, the access to health facilities, type of ailment household experienced, as well as contributing to the final household consumption to the GDP. In addition to this, we also have data from Nigeria Living Standards Survey that can be used to improve the weight that we are using for our consumer price index presently. Among some of the objectives of the survey, these are the key ones.
Let me get to you. We have the Human Development Report prepared annually by the UNDP for Nigeria, as it does for other countries. In what way is the Nigerian Living Standards Survey different from the Human Development Report of the UNDP?
Thanks for the question. So these are two different things, actually. So Human Development Report, so it focuses on Human Development Index, it focuses on gender inequality, gender index, as well as environmental sustainability and economic sustainability, socioeconomic sustainability. So Living Standards Survey is one of the contributing sources for the Human Development Report.
Now, the report contains an extensive review of the demographic characteristics of Nigeria. How significant is the demographic characteristics to issues of the standards of living of the citizens?
Thank you. The characteristics of a nation determines the GDP expansion and growth. For instance, in Nigeria, we have a very large, broad-based young population. About 54% of male population and about 51% for female population constitute the Nigerian population structure. This is a huge number of youth that can be engaged productively to produce wealth for the nation. We can also look at the average household size in the country when we talk of demographic structure. The average household size in Nigeria is 5.1 persons per household. If you look at the structure, where we have a larger number of members in a household, this means there will be pressure on the resources available to that household and can eventually take the household into poverty. If you look at the data, you will see that the Gawa that is having over 8 on the average members in the household in that state, Jigawa is one of the states that have a higher proportion of households in the poverty or that are poor in the country.
Okay, Mr. Azad, let me throw this question to you. Okay, you want to say something there, Mr. Azad?
Yes, I wanted to add a few more points with Mr. Adeniran is that so to measure the living standard, it is very important to understand the composition of a household. It's age groups, whether people are seeking education, how they're seeking healthcare. So all this information would be actually very, very important to measure the poverty rate in the country. So the demographic information is quite important to understand the composition of a household so that a welfare measure can be drawn.
Now, Mr. Zad, the World Population Day was marked on Saturday, July 11, and the report aims to monitor the progress in population's welfare of Nigerians. How does it tie in with the GDP per capita income of about $2,200 of today?
So this data set is actually quite rich to have a very good understanding of the welfare of the households, the consumption patterns and all. So when it comes to the GDP, so it's basically the household expenditure contributes to the GDP. So it can be
Mm.
measured to what extent household expenditure is contributing to the GDP. So when it comes to the $2,200 GDP per capita, so it does not reflect quite well on the poverty though. But at the same time, countries with higher GDP tend to have lower poverty rate.
Now,
so we can actually measure using these data sources. These data sources to what extent GDP growth is contributing towards poverty reduction. So, for example, if a country grow by 5 percentage points, but that not necessarily translate to 5% reduction in poverty, right? So it will also depend on poverty targeted interventions. So the growth not necessarily translate to poverty reduction, so at the same rate. But at the same time, countries with higher GDP tend to have lower poverty rates.
Still to you, Mr. Azad, what does the survey tell us about the demographics dividends of the country and what are the policy implications?
So demographic dividend is something that it's the working age population, right? So Nigeria can benefit quite a lot from it. For example, 54% of all males and 51% of all females are below the age of 20 years of old. So, so these young working age people can be capitalized to be the productive member of the society and to contribute to the GDP. So many countries actually took advantage of demographic dividend. So the countries in South Asia, Southeast Asia, so in those places, the demographic dividend were heavily capitalized to attract investments to create a productive workforce to improve the economy. So, for example, Bangladesh is a huge example for this, where the country has taken advantage of its young population into labor-intensive industries to attract foreign direct investments and also grow economy. The similar way could be applied in Nigeria also, not necessarily in the exact same way. It has to suit the local the criteria and all. But at the end, demographic dividend could be capitalized to improve the economy, to reduce inequality, to reduce the poverty rate and all.
All right, Mr. Deniro, let me come to you. President Muhammadu Buhari just signed a 10.8 trillion naira budget, Is this enough to improve the living standard of Nigerians, considering the growing population, and in particular with COVID-19 here?
Thank you. The way the economy of the Nigerian is now, we cannot expect a miracle to happen overnight. The budget is huge to stabilize and to make people not further drift into poverty. I think what is much more important is the level of implementation of the budget. If the budget is well released on time and is channeled towards a productive sector of the economy, I think it can substantially reduce the pain that the households and individuals in Nigeria are feeling now. Apart from the level of implementation, the sectors of the economy can also be prioritized. For instance, if more attention is given to micro, small, and medium enterprises, and a lot of investment and policies are geared towards that sector, I think it can really help to stabilize and cushion the effect of COVID-19 in our society. Again, we are glad that the Presidential Task Force on the COVID-19 are doing a great job to ensure that the pandemic is curtailed to a reasonable level. We have not had a serious spike that can take the workforce as well as the economy down the more. With the rate that we are going, if citizens and people comply more with the guidelines given, I think by the time we open more remaining economy that are yet to be opened, we may have more productive and increase or stabilize our GDP. But it cannot happen immediately.
Mr. Deniro, let me still ask you, still in the issue of population and, of course, growth. Is it time for Nigeria to start creating more awareness about sexual and reproductive health needs, or perhaps consideration for birth control, since the economy is not growing at the same pace with the population growth rate?
Yeah, I think the campaign for reduction in number of children and then total fertility rate reduction in the country started not now. I think the government has already started working towards this. If you remember, in 2018, around September, there was a two-day national conference that was called to address the issue of high fertility rate, large number of births to women in the households. So the government has started this. What we just needed is to continue to pursue the population policy that we already have in place in the country, and to continue to strengthen the campaign for the need for us to reduce the fertility rate. Because if the fertility rate is reduced, even by one person out of the total fertility of about 3.5 that we have now, if it is reduced by just one person, it will have a multiplier effect on the GDP in the country and per capita income to the Nigerians.
All right, Mr. Zad, what are the major government policies that the government needs to put in place to improve the various parameters impacting the standard of living of the people of Nigeria?
Better paying jobs. Better paying jobs, improvement in the private sector. Because at the end, when it comes to the policies, so the government actually puts in policies and creates an enabling environment for the private sector to thrive. But at this, it is the private sector that actually creates jobs. and whether it is actually creating better paying jobs and increasing the formal sector. So all this could actually contribute to improve the living standard. So there are plenty of examples around the world that countries have invested in better paying jobs, in employing, in capitalizing the unskilled, semi-skilled, and skilled labor force, and create better jobs for female, for male, and also youths. So which all this could actually contribute towards improving the living standard, because the better income that you have, you will invest more on your consumption, on your food and non-food items. You will invest in education, you will invest in your children. So all this will contribute towards improving the living standard in the country. But at the end, it is better paying jobs.
All right, Mr. Adeniro, the report alluded to the fact that 18% of households are headed by women. What is the implication of this gender data contained in the report? What is the impact of gender on living standards?
Yes, about 18.8% of our households in Nigeria are headed by females. What this means is that government should pay attention to empowerment of women in terms of education and in terms of providing a conducive environment for them to be able to compete favorably with men. Because we now know that a large percentage of households are also headed by female. Not only this, the implementation of the budget that we are just talking about now, when we talk about investing or paying attention to MSME, it's not just to pay attention to micro, small, and medium enterprises, but to look at which of these enterprises are mainly owned or dominated by women. And government can make conscious effort to focus on those particular enterprises so that women can be empowered to also make contribution to the household and to have a better living standard where they are heading.
To you now, Mr. Adeniro. The report covered a wide scope on aspects of literacy. What is the impact of literacy on the standard of living of the people?
Literacy, they said, liberate people from poverty. If you are literate, you have the high potential to get a better paid job. If you are literate, you have opportunity to compete for the available decent job in the country. So when people are educated, there are a lot of opportunity opened up for them to be productive in the economy. If you look at the data, the households that are headed by literacy or literate people, they have less proportion of such households that are poor in the country. Whereas, if you see household where the head is not literate, larger proportion of such households are under the poverty line. So which means the more educated people are, the less tendency that their household and themselves will be in poverty. It is always known that the higher the level of education, the lower the tendency to be in poverty.
All right.
So where households are headed by literate people, they get good job and be able to provide for members of their family and then get out of poverty.
Okay, let's wrap up this conversation with Mr. Azad. Mr. Azad, the private sector is playing a major role in providing education and healthcare service delivery. However, most often, many citizens could not afford the private schools or private hospitals. What is your perspective on the idea of private sector delivery of social services? What model can work best to deliver such an outcome?
So private sector actually, you're very right. Private sector plays a very important role in providing healthcare, as well as education and all. So so it depends on the affordability of the people. Whether so if you do look into, for example, Lagos, so there you will see that a lot more people actually seeking healthcare from the private sector. So as from the seeking education from the private schools. So that means people actually can afford to get services from the private sector.
All right.
As long as the people's ability could be improved, people's living standard could be improved, their income could be improved. So the private sector could be instrumental in providing these services.
Okay, thank you.
But again, so the government services is a lot more subsidized.
Thank you, Mr. Azad. We may just have to leave that conversation. Yeah, we may just have to leave that conversation here. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your time. Mr. Abdul Azad is a senior economist at World Bank, and of course, Mr. Yemi Adeniro is the director of Sector and Household Statistics Department at the National Bureau of Statistics. We'll do a quick break, and when we come back, we'll cross over to London, and of course, back here, we'll look at the markets. Do stay with us.